Hello, listeners and fellow book lovers. Welcome to the Book Snug, a bi-weekly conversational podcast about books and the reading life. My name is Stephanie.
And I'm Julia.
We're a mother and a daughter who love reading and talking about books, the ones we adore and the ones we don't. We're delighted you're here, so grab your favorite hot drink or ice-cold beverage and settle in for another cozy, bookish chat.
Hi, Mom.
Hi, Julia. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm okay. It's rainy and dreary outside, and I could be really blah, but we're sitting in the Book Snug.
Mm-hmm.
We have the warm and cozy candle by Sweetwater Decor burning. I'm drinking a lovely London Fog that I made from scratch. So
Aren't you
things
fancy?
are looking pretty good. How about you?
I've had better days, but I agree. I'm here. I'm drinking a good tea, a nice chai. I have on a cozy sweatshirt.
Cozy sweatshirts make everything better.
Yeah.
What does it say on your sweatshirt?
So this, I mentioned a little bit ago that I had gotten a couple of things from Etsy. This is from Mandarin Designs on Etsy, and it says bookworm. It's a giant, I got it extra large. It's a giant gray sweatshirt, and it just says bookworm on it.
It looks really comfy.
It's very comfy. Today, for Chapter 7, we're talking about our rules for reading. And this might feel kind of abstract at the beginning. And this idea did come from Ryan Holiday, who is a well-known modern Stoic.
Yes.
Or you can find on social media. Yes. And he did post a YouTube short where he kind of broke down these 8 rules for reading. And from that, we drew inspiration to kind of come up with our own rules for reading, which we will get into in a second. But we are going to just start off. I'm just going to very briefly kind of list these 8
rules.
And then kind of go from there. So Ryan's first rule is to read all of the time. His second is no speed reading. Third is classics are better, or older published books are better. Number 4 is to quit bad books, with kind of the philosophy of taking 100 pages minus how old you are, and that's what remains is how many pages you take to make that decision.
Right. So the older you are, the fewer pages you take.
Number 5 is to take notes. 6, to find your next book and what you're currently reading. Number 7 is to find something to apply. So how are you going to use what you're reading? And then number 8 is just to simply recommend it if it's good.
Right.
So as you can probably tell, these are a bit more serious, these rules.
Yeah.
Than probably what our rules will end up being. But it was a fun exercise in introspection and self-reflection, kind of thinking about our reading profiles in a way.
Yes.
And I think just, as we're getting into this, for some of mine, it's not an always thing. My rules don't always apply.
Right.
Or there's justifications for them or exceptions.
Generalizations, really.
Yeah. Yeah. So we are not nearly as strict as Ryan probably is with his. But this was just a fun exercise that we thought we would share with the class.
Yeah. And we thought that maybe talking about our rules for reading would inspire our listeners to take a moment and just reflect on their own reading lives and maybe think up a few rules of their own.
Yeah. We are going to take turns bouncing back and forth.
Tag teaming.
Yep. With our rules. So why don't you start us off, Mom? What would be your first one here?
My first rule is quality over quantity. It really doesn't matter how many books I read a year. I do make a book number goal every year, but it's one that I can easily meet without working hard at all. But I definitely want to be working more towards reading good literature. And when I say good literature, I simply mean books that make me happy, that I enjoy reading.
Right, subjective.
Right. It's absolutely subjective what I call quality. Somebody else might think that my quality is trash, but again, I don't care because it's my reading.
It's what you're spending your time on.
Right. Yeah. But I definitely want to focus more on picking books that are going to be good for me instead of a number that doesn't mean anything at all.
Yeah. Which I think maybe a note that I could make here, that was all English, 100%, is so far for me this year, I have read just about half of the amount of books that I read in the total of 2022.
Good for you.
Which is mind-boggling for me to think about. But it's this interesting dichotomy of quality over quantity. I've read a lot of books so far, but a lot of my books have also been 4-star or above books. I've had a couple of not great ones, but it's a really interesting dichotomy to look at that as well.
And that is the best kind of reading, when you feel like you're reading a lot and it's all good. And I honestly feel like that's been happening for me too. I've read a lot of really good books. I have a couple 5-star reads already. And so I'm happy with my reading, and I'm reading my average number of books. I'm not reading more than normal or less. So yeah, it's good. So that's it. Quality over quantity.
The other thing though, is you do know that as you keep reading good quality book after good quality book, that bad book is going to come so much worse.
It's going to feel worse.
Yeah. And then it will ultimately throw me into worse of a slump because I had such a good streak for so long. Now it's just...
So it's easier for you to get slumpy if you've been reading a lot and then read a bad book.
A lot of good ones. And then I read not a good one.
Okay.
So hopefully mine is still off for a while.
What's your first rule?
My first one is maybe my cardinal rule above everything else, that I read for joy and pleasure. I hated reading for school. I hated it. Whether we read books, together in the classroom for different projects or summer reading, I hated it because it meant that I couldn't read at my own pace and I couldn't enjoy the story. I had to think analytically about it or do projects about it. So, for example, I love Jane Eyre. I read that way before we had to read it in high school. And I hated reading it in high school because I had to think about all of the symbolism that was in the book when it's just a fabulous story by itself.
Right. And you're probably picking up on all the symbolism without really discussing it and diving deep.
Right.
Yeah.
And I understand why English teachers have to do what they have to do.
Yes. But I have many thoughts on reading in school.
Yeah, this is coming. This conversation is for another time, but it's coming.
Yeah.
So for me, when I'm reading, I take it as a time. It's a hobby. It's self-care, if we want to put it in that category too. But it's a time for me to do something that I enjoy, that is purposefully escapism. And that can even be nonfiction escapism. But it's my time to pursue what I want with what I'm reading.
Yeah.
So
that's a good rule.
Yeah. And I'm going to touch on this in a second, but even if I'm reading like devotional books, that can even get a little funny for me too, because it's the structured, I have to read at this time or I have to read this passage, and then it's a little bit, well, now it's not
enjoyable.
Yeah. Or it's not quote unquote for me anymore. It's for another purpose. And I have a hard time letting my reading be for anything other than for me.
Okay.
What's your next one?
My number 2 rule, and I guess I should say these aren't in any particular order. I don't have the most important rule first. I just put them all on a list.
Yeah.
So my number 2 rule is I do not read more than 2 books at a time. Mm-hmm. I find that my psyche just can't do that. I just can't read more than 2 books. And I only have an audiobook and a print book, whether that is an ebook or a physical book going at one time. I am a mood reader, but I'm a mood reader in the fact that it takes me a while to pick what I want to read. But once I pick it, I am committed to that book until I decide I don't want to read it and I stop or I finish it. More than 2 books is just too crazy for me. And the thing I have found when I have tried to read more than 2 is that I'm always going to pick the book I'm most interested in and the rest are going to languish anyway. Yeah. So I just want to focus on the book I want to focus on and finish it and move to the next. I do have a qualification here though. And I'm in a situation right now where this is going to apply. I am currently reading The Count of Monte Cristo. And I am enjoying it, but it is 1,200 pages, and I've been reading it for almost 2 weeks. That is a long time for me to focus on a single book, and I'm getting a little bit impatient because I tend to switch over books faster than that. And I'm smack in the middle right now, and it's dragging a little bit for me, and I'm not liking the count very much. So I have been throwing in middle grade graphic novels here and there just to cut it up a little bit. And those are things I can read in an hour. So they're not a book I'm starting and then it's just kind of dangling out here in the middle of nowhere waiting for me to pick it up again. So I will do that occasionally, but that is the only time I will mix in another book. And you mentioned devotional books earlier. I'm in the middle of a devotional book where I'm studying the names of God. And the book has, for each chapter, each name of God, it has numerous Bible verses, and I'm doing a Bible verse a day. So it's really lengthening the book.
Yeah.
I never count that
sure.
in my recreational reading ever. So I do have a third book going right now, but I don't count it.
Right.
And I don't count the graphic novels as third books. I just toss them in like a snack occasionally in the midst of this really long book. So 2 books only for me.
As I was thinking about this, I'm the same way in that I read one at a time. But for me, it's not a rule as much as it is a preference because...
Well, these are all preferences, really.
Sure. But I can listen to an audiobook and read a physical book. I just prefer not to because I tend to forget about the audiobook, where I know that that's another way that you consume stories in that way. And it's not distracting or easily forgotten. Whereas for me, I just know my brain enough to know that one book is a preference and anything else tends to get forgotten.
Yeah. And the other thing with my 2 books, this could probably be like rule 2A, is that I never read 2 nonfiction books at the same time. I always have to have the relief of a fiction book. I'll read 2 fiction books at the same time as long as they're not the same genre. Like I don't like to read 2 murder mysteries at the same time or 2 romances. But I definitely don't do 2 nonfiction books at the same time because generally my biggest need for reading is escape and entertainment, and nonfiction tends not to be that for me. Yeah. What's your rule number 2?
Okay, so my next one is to honor my boundaries and my limits. And this can sound very new age or protect your peace or guard your heart. And in a sense, that's what I'm doing, is I'm guarding my heart. I have learned as I've gotten older that I think I'm a highly sensitive person.
I'm pretty sure you are, Julia. I've known that for a long time.
Which just means, if you never heard that term before, is that I feel the world deeply.
Yes.
So I'm very sensitive to, if I'm watching a movie and a difficult topic comes up, that can affect me for a while, or hearing other people's stories, whether it's trauma or not, I can feel that. So like an empath, but a step further, almost. Anyway, as I'm reading, I've gotten older and have acknowledged that it's necessary for me to be mindful of what I'm reading or what I know that I can't tolerate anymore. So an example of this is I have read domestic thrillers kind of stories, and as much as I might like the thrilling aspect of that, they leave me very paranoid and anxious.
Okay.
And so I know that I can't do that anymore, because if I'm reading a book because I'm paranoid and I'm anxious and I need to finish it, it's no longer enjoyable. Or there's a book, and I'm not going to name it because I don't want anybody else to read it. But there was a book that fell into that category that had to deal with some pretty evil things, and then also was centered around a character with Down syndrome.
Yes.
And because that's my line of work, that book deeply upset me. And so I do not read those stories anymore. Also, if there's specific, topics in books that are upsetting to me, whether because they're related to personal things that I've walked through, allowing myself the grace to pause a story and not push through it because it's bringing up emotions for me. So we talked about Island Queen and how the scene about her husband's death, how that made me cry. And I knew, okay, I'm not going to be able to read this story or continue on this story until I allow myself the time to process that section. So this is something that's become more important for me as I've gotten older, whereas, I don't know, a couple of years ago, I would have just plowed right through and
dealt with the consequences.
Yeah.
So are you saying that you won't necessarily stop a book, but you will give yourself time to work through whatever situation is in the story that's upsetting you, and then you'll come back to it? Or will you decide, I'm not going any further?
At that point, I think it depends on where I stood with the story up until that point.
Okay.
So if I knew that it was coming, and I was enjoying the story enough up to that point, then I'd probably pause, maybe take a few days, maybe do something else that I really enjoy, and then come back to it. If I'm not liking the story and I didn't know that it was in there, then I'm more likely to DNF it.
Do you read trigger warnings for books?
I don't seek them out.
Okay.
If they're on the back of the book or if they're in the inside flap as I'm perusing it in Barnes & Noble, I'll take it into consideration. But I don't seek them out.
Okay.
Yeah. But I think all of it is just coming back to, I know myself well enough now that I will value my peace over how much or what I'm reading.
Okay.
So that got really serious. What's your next one, Mom?
This is not serious. My third rule is that even though I'm a mood reader and I grant myself every opportunity to pick and choose what I want to read in the moment, I do require some structure to fulfill some of my other rules, like quality over quantity. And I find that I have my best reading if I have a little bit of structure in place. I don't make TBRs because as soon as I make a pile of books, I will not read a single one of them. I do definitely have a rebel streak to my personality, even against myself. So I find that very loose reading challenges work the best for me. And I'm not talking about the reading challenges that have 52 very specific prompts. I'm talking about reading challenges that give you a single word prompt or just like a category per month to work on. And then you can apply that however you want to. So this year I said I wasn't going to do a reading challenge, and I ended up getting involved in the Unread Shelves reading challenge, which is basically all you have to do is read one book from your unread shelf every month, and that's good enough.
Oh, so I'm doing it.
Yeah. You're definitely doing it. You've been doing it. But she also gives you a monthly prompt. And the prompts do not have to be in the title of the book. It's just however you want to use it. So, for instance, this month the prompt is courage. And I picked Endurance, about Shackleton's journey in the Antarctic, because that fit the prompt of courage. I think The Count of Monte Cristo fits the prompt of courage, and that's why I'm reading it right now. I'm going to read The Sun Does Shine for Black History Month, and I think that's also courageous because it's about a Black man who was wrongfully imprisoned. He was innocent, and he spent many years of his life in prison. So it's helping me choose books from my many, many books I own that I haven't read, but it's still giving me all this freedom to pick and choose whatever I'm feeling in the moment. But I definitely need that. If I don't have something, I just kind of languish in like tons of murder mysteries, or I start picking up vapid romances that I don't even like. And I still do it. So this helps me read deeper. It helps me to read harder books. And it ultimately helps me pick up books that I'm enjoying more. So that's my third rule.
Yeah, it's interesting because previously I would have said no structure whatsoever because I want to read on my own terms. However, and I think it's more so this year than it was previously as I get more into tracking how I'm reading. But for me, it comes back to buy-in. If I care about what I'm doing enough, I'm going to see it through.
Right.
Even though I would not call myself goal-oriented in any way. But having my goal of reading my TBR list and having it mapped out, and now I'm just so excited to see how quickly I can get through these and read these stories.
Yeah.
So I guess maybe my structure is keeping me moving. Whereas like previous years where I've had no structure, my reading was so
off and on, up and down.
Yeah. And I definitely agree that I tended to read very similar things and didn't stretch too far out of my comfort zone. And so at least at this point in time, now granted that could change in 2, 3, 4 years. At this point in time, having at least the structure of reading only my books on my shelf is really enriching and enhancing my reading experience.
And it gives you a focus. I think that for me, that's what it is. It just gives me something to focus on. I don't always have to focus on it. I can randomly pick out a book that I want to read for no reason other than it sounds good to me. But I am a goal-oriented person, very much so. If I have a goal, I am very motivated to work towards it. But not if somebody tells me I have to do it.
Right. I'm the same. I'm the same.
Okay, what's your third rule, Julia?
So my third one here is, it sounds so silly, but I don't need to keep a book just because I've read it. I think I've mentioned this before, that I'm on a bit of a very intentional, I don't want to call it journey, but I'm trying to be very intentional about building good spending habits, but also taking care of the things that I already have. And if I know that I'm keeping a book just because I read it, but I don't care about it too much, then that's not a good demonstration of either of those habits I'm looking to build. And so maybe this is more of just a reminder of that I can get rid of a book. It's okay. And that it opens up space for me to be even more intentional about what I do keep on my bookshelf.
Yeah. And maybe if you have the mindset that you're releasing the book to be found by somebody that's going to love it, it makes it so much easier.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it does. And definitely over the past 6 months, I've been a lot more ruthless with this than I think I've ever have before. So if you're looking for books, please come to a garage sale because you'll probably find a lot of my books there. But also, I care a lot right now in life about making sure that the things that are around me are things that I really care about and that have significant meaning or impact to me. And so if a book was just kind of wishy-washy, then it doesn't fit the bill and it can go.
Yep. That's a good philosophy overall, not just with books.
Yeah. I'm trying to adult over here.
Well, my number 4 rule is to DNF, which means did not finish, with abandon and without any guilt.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's because I'm getting to that point in life where I'm starting to think that life is very short. And I don't need to waste my time reading books that don't suit me, that I think are objectively bad or even subjectively bad, or just are not, they're not ending up being what I thought they were going to be.
Yeah.
So I carry no guilt with DNFing. I do not owe authors anything. I respect their efforts and I recognize that their book took a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, but I don't have to be the person to enjoy it and uphold it. So that's where I am with that. I don't have any issues with stopping a book and passing it along.
No. And I think even as time has continued to progress, I think you have an even lower tolerance for BS too. So if a book is just bugging you,
right. I'm just done. What I need to be careful of is talking smack about a book. Sometimes that's not fair either, especially if I don't give it much of a chance.
Right.
Not that I do that often, but usually when I'm not finishing a book, there's a reason. Occasionally it's just because it ended up being not what I thought it was going to be, but usually there is something that was really bothering me about it.
Right. So definitely as we've taken the time to talk about books we didn't like, I think we've both really been particular about the words that we choose because somebody is really proud of it at the end of the day. And there are people who are very proud of the person who wrote that book. And so it's just honoring that and being mindful of how we still think of that in our quiet. So,
Number 4 for you.
This is going to make me sound like such a weirdo, but respect the book.
Okay. So are you one of those people?
Coming right off of this, somebody put a lot of time and effort into this. For me, when I see a book, I see all of the collaborative creative effort that went into the book. So the author's story is there, but then the design of the cover, the way that the font is laid out, how the page is laid out, how, all of that. And I know that a lot of materials and resources went into that as well. And I'm one of those weird people that like a story is magical, a book is magical. Like, so let's treat it as what it is. So I I don't annotate my books. I know that's a huge thing right now on Book Talk or BookTube.
BookTube, yeah.
I don't put in my fiction books. Okay. I do not put Post-it notes or pen marks or anything. For some people, that really enhances their reading. For me, it doesn't.
Because you're hurting the book.
Yeah. I don't bend the front cover over while I'm reading. So sometimes people with paperbacks will like bend the front. I don't do that because it cracks the spine and it messes with how the book lays. I protect the covers. So
paper. Like hardcover?
Yeah.
Hardcover covers, the dust jackets.
Right, but then also paperbacks too. So if I'm taking a paperback in my backpack and stuff got smushed up and the cover gets all funny, I actually feel guilt about it. Same with the dust jacket. Like if I have a hardcover in, and I'm doing something with it and the dust jacket is on and the dust jacket gets dirty or ruined or torn, well, I feel awful.
Okay.
Now, a note on the annotations here. If it's a nonfiction or if it is devotional, spiritual book, that's different. If it's a book that I'm gleaning information from, or if it's a book that has a ton of meaning to me or I've reread several times. So my copy of Jane Eyre, I have lots of things underlined with pencil.
Yeah.
With pencil. In my Les Miserables copy that I have that's ginormous, there's tons of things underlined in that as well. If the writing is spectacular, I might one line or two throughout the book because of how the way the words were put together.
So you can remember the quote.
Right. Yeah. But in general, I protect my books.
Yeah.
Which is why that I have mentioned that it's an issue for me that my books are just stacked in piles on the floor because
they're not being
protected.
Yeah. Well, I just figured out something I can get you for Christmas next year. You can buy book sleeves, which are these little pockets that you just drop your book in and they protect the cover. So if you're putting it in a backpack or a shoulder bag or something, it's in a small bag. They're very cute.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't know those existed.
So now you know what you're getting for Christmas.
Okay, great. In 10 months.
My number 5 is very simple, and that is reread with abandon. I enjoy returning to books that I have loved over and over again. And that it's mostly just comfort reading. If I'm not really sure what I feel like reading, if I'm feeling kind of slumpy, I've read a couple bad books and I'm a little gun shy, I'll pick up a book that I know and love and spend some time reading that. Books like The Hobbit, Persuasion by Jane Austen, I return to Beauty by Robin McKinley, and then just random books that I have loved and feel like I want to reread again. I have a whole list of them lately. Like I would like to reread All the Light We Cannot See just to see if it's as wonderful as I remember it being.
It is.
So that's the whole part of my role is just rereading with abandon because it's pleasurable to me and comforting.
For me, number 5 is again kind of maybe most of these just have to do with protecting my bookshelves, I guess. Because number 5 is to limit duplicates.
Oh, yeah.
And I think, again, this is just for me, just to find the version that I love and to keep it. So whether that's my favorite cover or, whatever, I am not a book collector in that I want tons of copies of books. Again, there are a few exceptions, and I'll get to in a second. I collect books in terms of going to the antique store and buying old books. That's my book collecting. And I have some beautiful versions of books that I just am thrilled to have in my possession. But for my regular everyday working bookshelf, I don't have duplicates. Now, again, okay, so there's a couple that are a little bit funny in there. The Lunar Chronicles by Marissa Meyer, which I'm surprised that I'm just now talking about it, is a favorite of mine. And I believe they were her first phase of her cover. So they're kind of the standard covers that everybody knows. But
the android leg in the shoe and the braid. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And I will definitely talk about this series at another time. So I'm not dropping it and leaving.
Yeah.
Anyway, she just mentioned that there's a limited edition of the covers through, it looks like a fantasy subscription box.
Okay.
However, these covers are stunning. And I briefly considered calculating how much money I would need to spend to get them because of just how fabulous they were.
Mm-hmm.
No, I don't have the subscription, so that's null and void. But Harry Potter is the other one for me. I loved this series growing up. It is still one of the series that I will not read the whole series, but I will pick and choose random ones to reread. Mm-hmm. The first and third generally come out around Halloween. But I have a duplicate of the fifth book because I do.
Because siblings.
But I love the illustrated copies.
Yes.
And then also I have the third because I think you got a duplicate and then I picked up one of those.
Yeah.
And I love the idea of reading those with kids at bedtime because the illustrations are fabulous.
Yeah.
But I also like the Minalima versions, the pop-up ones as well. And so do I want both of those or not? And
are you asking me?
No, I'm posing the questions.
I'm going to say yes. This is one rule that you and I are on opposite sides of the coin because I definitely own several versions of some of my favorite books.
Yeah. Well, and I was going to mention Jane Eyre, which is a favorite of mine. So I have my copy that I picked up at an old bookstore in the Poconos years and years and years ago. Mm-hmm. It has markings and annotations all over the place. I think there's even dried flowers at the proposal scene. Like it's my book.
Yeah.
But then you gave me a beautiful version for my birthday that now I love. And how do I get rid of the one that has all of my markings in it? So I just keep them together.
Yeah, you don't.
Yeah. I think for me, this rule comes out of the fact of my senior year of high school, I got 2 yearbooks. And so that annoys me because I don't need 2 yearbooks. And so I think it just kind of ripples down to my bookshelf.
Right.
And for context, I can't get rid of either of these yearbooks because one has my friend's notes and the other one has my name on it. So I can't. It would just feel very strange.
Yeah.
So, but I think that's where this idea comes from of limiting duplicates and finding the versions that I like the most and tying back to the duplicate or the intentional pursuit of things on my shelf.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we definitely are on opposite ends on that rule for sure. My number 6 rule is I agree with Ryan Holiday that speed reading is a myth. Mm-hmm. I read books because I love reading the words. Mm-hmm. I love how sentences are put together. One of the biggest pleasures for me is just sinking into the reading, sinking into the writing of the story. And if you ask me what I look for in a good book is the actual writing. Yeah. I love not flowery writing, but I love beautiful writing. And I actually like writing that's very spare, where it feels like every single word was purposely chosen. And I think if you speed read, you miss all of that. And then the other thing for me with speed reading is I will not remember anything if I speed read. Yeah. I am a fast reader. Just naturally, I read very fast. But I have no reason to speed read. I am not trying to get through 500 books. No. I just want to get through the books I get through, and I won't be speed reading to do it.
Right. And there is a difference between speed reading versus skimming. Because skimming because of, oh my gosh, I need to know what happens next. There's a difference between that and speed reading.
Right. Or skimming because you're reading a story. Yeah. You're not really enjoying it. But you want to know, you need to know where it goes.
And then you'll come back and read everything.
No, I won't. I skim. I recently had that experience with no exit. Oh, and I forget who the author is. It's a very popular book. There was a movie made based on it. And I read it just a couple weeks ago because it's in a snowy setting. And I wasn't very far into it. I wasn't very far into it. And I thought, this is not for me. But I wanted to know how it ended. So I pretty much skimmed most of the book, starting from like a third in.
Oh my gosh.
I counted it as reading.
Sure.
This is after I said I don't speed read.
Yeah.
Because I know, like, I would be able to recount to you everything that happened, even though I probably read like 10 words on each page. That's skimming. And I only ever do that in thrillers.
Oh, okay.
Ever. Because if I pick up a thriller, I want to know how it's going to end. But that's different to me than speed reading, like you said, skimming. But I don't go back then and read.
So, like, if I'm reading, I can't think of any good examples, but if it's a highly emotional scene or a climactic scene or something, and oh my gosh, I need to know what happens, I will maybe skim the next page because I don't want to spoil anything, and then I'll go back and read if it feels okay. But I won't like skim chapters. No. I just need a little bit to make sure that my emotions are okay.
Okay. That's a different reason for skimming than I have. Yeah. What's your next rule? I think we're on number 6. Yeah.
Again, I think a lot of mine maybe are not so much rules as they are just parameters I've set for myself at this point. And again, in a couple of years, these could very much change. My number 6 is that I can have a differing opinion from what's popular and that it's okay. And this, again, feels so silly and like, duh, like you can have a different opinion. But I think growing up, I had a lot of anxiety about some of my opinions with books. And that's a whole other conversation. But now that I've gotten to a point where I can read a book and it is okay to like not like it, that I
like it, and everybody else doesn't. Yeah.
Right. That it is okay for me to hold that opinion because it was my experience and nobody else's, and therefore I can have my thoughts on it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think this one is just more of a reminder for me, or like a stake in the ground. This is true than anything else.
Yeah. I had a lot of experience with that last year. I read several very popular newly published books and hated every single one. And people loved them. So I knew that I was the outlier and that it was probably just me, but that's a good rule to have because it allows you to have your feelings without feeling judged. Yeah.
I mean, there are definitely still times currently where I'm like, did I not read that book right? What am I missing? But I have to remind myself that the books are subjective, that they're different for everybody, and that it is okay if I thought this book was not that great or this book was the best thing I've ever read. And that's
Other
fine.
People don't agree.
Right, because we're all coming to books with our life experiences and
our
that's
preferences.
Fine.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, my number 7 rule is to keep track of my reading for reflection and reference. And this for me just means rating books on Goodreads and then writing private little notes about each book. So if I want to talk about them or write about them, I have something I can go back and reference. And it's just fun then to go back and look over all the books that you've read and remember books that have really touched your life that you may not be able to recall just with your brain. And I'm telling you, the older I get, the harder that is to remember books that you've read and enjoyed. So yeah, that's more just like an administrative thing for me.
Yeah. And I think definitely that's becoming a rule of mine. I'm not great about updating my notes or my reviews actively as I should be, but having that structure in place of this is where I can put all of my thoughts has been really helpful to me in keeping track of what I'm reading, but then also why I liked that book. And then it also serves as I think I mentioned this before, as a time capsule in a way, in that I mark what was going on in my life at that point as well. So I can go back and be like, oh, maybe this is why I like this book so much because this other thing was happening. Or maybe this is why I had a negative experience with this book because this thing was happening as well. So it gives some context to that as well, which I'm enjoying.
Yep. Very nice. What's your number 7 rule, Julia?
Number 7, I could have mentioned earlier when we were having this conversation, but it is give each book a solid chance and to read something for myself before passing judgment. Especially if something is a movie, I'm very quick to be like, oh, absolutely not, never. For example, I have not read The Hunger Games, and I don't think I ever will, because the very idea of kids fighting kids. It's
To the
funny with
death.
me. Yeah.
Mhm.
I understand that there's more to the story.
Right.
My husband Ben has read them and he really liked them. It also
Well,
fits his
that's the
personality. But based on that premise of the story alone, I know that I wouldn't like it. However, I know that I should probably read them if I want to engage in conversation about why I have issues with it or
Right.
not.
You can't have a conversation if you haven't read the books.
Right.
Yeah.
I this is going to get a lot of flack, but I have DNF'd The Handmaid's Tale. And that's because I felt it was important for me to try to read it before making any kind of statement. And I could not get past the writing. And so therefore I DNF'd it. So I can't talk to the subject material.
Yeah.
I can talk about her writing,
Right.
which I won't do right now. But allowing myself, or rather, not forcing myself, but holding myself to the standard of reading something for myself before engaging in any type of conversation with it. One, because it just makes you look foolish if you don't. But then
Right.
two, then I have some understanding of what the conversation is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think that's definitely a good rule to follow.
Mm-hmm. It's not always enjoyable to do, especially if I have a strong opinion in the opposite direction. But I know that it's a mark of maturity and a mark of, there's another word I want that I can't pull, but
Being educated. Yeah.
of being willing to do that and then even admit that I had the wrong opinion too.
All right. Well, Ryan had 8 rules, so we are doing 8 rules. And that means this will be my last rule. And I think I'm going to go with FOMO decreases my reading enjoyment. And all I mean by that is when I give into the fear of missing out, and this almost always has to do with overly hyped new releases, my reading suffers. Because I get the book, because everybody's excited about it, and they're all giving it 5 stars, and it ends up being bad. Sometimes it's objectively bad.
Yeah.
Other times it's just bad for me.
Yeah.
And so I need to stop. I need to stop with the FOMO. Now, I don't get it often. I can spend my whole life reading what I want to and being happy, but just occasionally, like there were 3 or 4 times last year in particular where these books came up that were really, really hyped and the covers were cool and everybody was loving them. And I gave in, and a lot of times I purchased the book and ended up really hating the book. So I guess I'm going to say my rule number 8 is be very, very cautious with FOMO.
Which is interesting because it sounds like that's in terms of books you're looking to read.
Right, yeah.
Whereas my statement about that I can have a different opinion, it's FOMO too, but post-reading.
Right.
Of wanting to be included in...
Fear of missing out on being able to discuss books and be on the side that everybody else is on.
Or feel included in the positive reviews.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that we both kind of share that experience, but in different parts of the reading process.
It's so funny because FOMO in general is not something I ever have an issue with, ever.
Then where did I get it from?
I don't know, but I definitely suffer from it a little bit with hyped new releases, especially in genres that I really enjoy. So I just my rule is to be very cautious when it comes to FOMO, book FOMO. Well, Julia, what is your 8th and final rule for us today?
My last rule is, again, I think it's fitting the sense of some of the others of just because I rated a book low doesn't mean it was a waste of time.
And I 100% agree.
I think I can sometimes fall into that trap of, this book was only 2 stars, or I absolutely hated it, or an example of this is I finished this winter Atlas 6 by Olivia Blake. And it is the lowest book I've rated so far this year at about 3 stars.
Okay.
And for me, it was a matter of I liked the topic. I didn't like how it was done.
Right.
Or I liked the idea and whatever. But I have to remind myself that it wasn't a waste of time, especially in the context of all the other really good books I've read, because I got to experience a story that still interests me, just maybe not to the height that some of the others did. So that the reminder that it is okay, or that it was not a waste of time to read something that was not great.
That wasn't 5 stars. I mean, you're saying bad books. To me, that means like books I really did not like.
Yeah.
A 3-star book for me is a fine book. It's not awful.
Right.
It's
not
not
in context.
Fantastic. Yeah. But I think too with bad books, sometimes I think bad books help you define what's most important to you in a book better than books you love. It's much easier to talk about bad books. It's much easier to identify what didn't work for you. Yeah. And then on the flip side of that, it can help you identify what really does work for you.
Yes.
But when you have a 5-star book that you absolutely love, sometimes you can't really say,
right.
This is what made it so fabulous for me. I think bad books are great experiences.
I think they're necessary experiences.
That's what I mean. I don't look forward to reading bad books, but they definitely help you determine what are the things you really look for in a book. And you can also say, you know what, if I was writing this story, which of course we aren't, this is how I would do it to make it better in my own personal opinion.
Yeah. And like to go back to The Handmaid's Tale for a second, which I don't know why this is the book I'm fixating on this time because it's been years since I've read it. But in reading the 2 or 3 chapters that I did of that book, I learned that author's tone is so important to me. And that if I can tell the voice and what the author and how they're writing, I found that that's important for me. And that it can make or break a reading experience as it ultimately broke that one.
Yeah.
So I agree that every bad or negative reading experience, there are things to glean from it.
Yeah.
Yep.
I agree.
So we did, those are 8 rules each, but definitely 16 to ponder.
Yeah, because when
Actually,
we first
24.
When we first what?
24.
Oh yeah,
rules.
because of Ryan's too. It's like math. What math are you doing? When we first discussed this, I thought our rules were going to be very similar, and here they were not similar at all, really. And maybe that means that our sweet listeners will have completely different rules than either of us. So that makes it very interesting.
It does.
What are we doing for our next episode, Julie?
Time.
Oh, is it time? For our next episode, our next chapter, we are going to be talking about books that play with time. And this is kind of in response to February being the leap year month. Even though it's not leap year this year, there is a quarter of a day somewhere that's not being counted for.
Yeah, it's very tongue-in-cheek.
Right. But anyway, we're going to talk about books that play with time, either time travel or time slips or immortality. Did we say that?
So. Sure.
So if you're interested in any of those topics and you're looking for some book recommendations, we're going to talk about books we've read and then possibly talk about some books we'd like to read because there are so many good ones that I haven't read yet.
There are.
So I hope you join us for our next episode related to time. And thank you for listening to us go off in tangents about our rules for reading.
Thanks so much for spending part of your day with us. We'd love for you to continue today's conversation at the @thebooksnug_podcast on Instagram and at the Book Snug Podcast on Facebook. All of our episodes can be found wherever you listen to podcasts, as well as at our website, thebooksnugpodcast.buzzsprout.com, where show notes for every episode can be found. We'd love to hear from you, so email us at thebooksnugpodcast@gmail.com.
As C.S. Lewis, one of our favorite authors, famously said, "You can never have a cup of tea large enough or a book long enough to suit me." And we wholeheartedly agree.